pilots are the same, even though they're different men. You can tell by the movement of the paddles and the speed that they move the paddles just exactly what they want you to do. And whereas each LSO officer has his own individual quirks, still they're remarkably the same. From one carrier to another, it was just absolutely uncanny how all LSOs just seem to be the same person. So anyway, coming in on my first approach, I was a little bit high, and he brought me down, and I was a little bit slow, so he sped me up. And you're watching that guy, and you're just busy watching him, and you got the deck out of the corner of your eye, and you're looking at the needle ball, keep that thing straight, and he gives you the chop. He brings one paddle right across his neck. That means chop. That means you cut your throttle, and you got the stick all the way back in your gut, and bang, you hit, and then you pour on the coal, and you go around again. And we had to do that, as they say, 3 times, and it's just another case here of feeling it. You know, you're coming in, and you know what your speed is. You practiced 100 times, so you're comfortable flying the airplane dirty and slow. And that, I think, is really the secret, and then keeping your eye on the LSO and just minding everything he does. The less he has to move those paddles, the better job you're doing. And here again, some cadets just could not get it, and they'd take wave off after wave off, and they'd go back and practice. They had to put in extra hours, you know, practicing to come out again. A lot of them didn't make it. So as Navy pilots, they never were qualified for carriers, so they put them into other segments of transport or patrol or observation, or put them on a battleship with a observation plane and things of that kind. But that was a great big step, and that kind of separated you from the rest of the guys. I mean, you were now carrier qualified. And the next step was to get checked out in the other airplanes that they fly. So we had about 10 hours in amphibians and 10 hours in PBJs, which is a B-25 in the Air Corps. And we flew about 10 hours in the F-4F, the Hellcat. We had about 10, 12 hours in the SB-2C, which is a biplane dive bomber. That took 37 turns to get the wheels up, and this was something that these were the first service aircraft that we went into war with. Incidentally, one little sidelight, when I was talking about qualifying and getting in the Marine Corps, it was very interesting that as of Pearl Harbor Day, the Marine Corps had 641 pilots, period. And so we were joining a very, very, exclusive fraternity. And at the time, like I say, we would have, as you would call in high school or something, we would have auditoriums where they would bring in all the classes at Pensy and give us updates, on fighter tactics, on the Japanese advancements, where they were and what they were doing. So we were becoming very serious about the war, and very serious. We were hearing a lot of atrocities that had gone on at the first part of Guadalcanal, and so we're right now we're saying, Jesus Christ, we got to get in the war before it's going to be over. And this is a whole attitude everybody is. Quite a few of us guys are having. We got to get in here before this war is over. Holy cow! And but the Navy had done a beautiful job of getting us trained and familiar with like amphibians and the PBY, the PBJ, which I say was a you all know the PBY. That was a big patrol plane. You climb at 95 knots, you cruise at 95 knots, you land at 95 knots. As long as you know 95 knots, you got it made. And I'm sure glad I didn't stay in the Navy and have to fly one of those things, but later on, thank God that we had those things. We called them Dumbos. And they are some of the bravest guys in the world were PBY pilots. They had just some beautiful, beautiful stories of how these guys would fly into areas where the shells flying all around and Zeros all around them. These guys would land and pick up pilots and get out of there. But it wasn't my cup of tea. But the Navy had done just a beautiful job of getting us trained, all the way through our engineering, our navigation, our history of the Navy, just molding you from, just a boot-ass kid, into a person, that you have confidence and you can do it, and you're part of a group, and you're nothing by yourself, but you've got to be with a group, and none of this hotshot stuff. And when you're alone in your dive or whatever you're doing it the best you can, and they instill so much confidence in you all along the line that I just wanted to take this time, because you hear people talk about it, and it was a real privilege to have qualified for it and to have made the grade. And now we're coming up pretty close to graduation, where we're going to get commissioned. And the Marine Corps now has pulled us aside and given us a lot of personal training as far as the history of the Corps and some of the rules and regulation, and instilled this esprit de corps thing into us. And they told us that immediately, upon our graduation, we were going to have a little bit of boot camp to find out why we are. The reason for Marine aviation is as simple as this, is that it's to support the ground troops down there. That's your first mission, is to take care of those guys that are down there crunching gravel and making the landing on an island, and it's your job to protect them. And so let's see, our training was wrapping up pretty fast now. We had completed ground school. We'd taken our finals. Everything was getting pretty tense, and I was waiting to see if we'd been accepted. Like I think I mentioned, we'd had 17 of us go in, and 8 of us had been picked out that could make it in our class. And so we knew we had made it, yet we were waiting for the rumors, of course. You always had the scuttlebutt and everything going around, and you don't make anything until you're called into the Marine Corps office on the station. So we got our call to come in, and all 8 of us went in, and then they told us, and of all the things I was expecting, I didn't know what I was going to expect, but they said, okay, men, here are the list of the approved tailors. And we all kind of looked at each other and couldn't figure out what he was saying. And this actually was the way that we knew that we had been finally accepted by the Marine Corps. The Marine captain said, these are the only list of tailors that are approved. So you may go to each one of these tailors and select the one you want, and you can buy your uniforms from these people. Holy cow! We were all tingling inside, because, as I say, this was a funny way to find out. Sure, we passed all our tests. We found, I said, yes, you qualified. Yes, you had. But there hadn't been any formal handshake or anything of that kind. So, I was just kind of wondering about this, and so were the other guys. So actually the tailors, when we walked in and got, our list, and there was 3 tailors we could go to. So holy cow, so off we go. Doty and Burrell and myself, so we went tearing off to this. We looked over all 3 tailors and looked at the, now we're really going to be hot shots, and we're looking over the quality of the of the goods that they've got and everything, and getting the prices. And so we went in, got all fitted up for our parade coat and our greens and our khakis and our whites. And the captain had said that it wouldn't really be necessary for you to go for your dress blues, because chances are you guys aren't going to be wearing dress blues for a long time, and because you're going to be having orders pretty quick, I imagine. And so we didn't even bother with dress blues, but we got our green parade coat and our green raincoat and our visor cap and our oversea cap and all the tops that go with it, and like I say, our sand brown belt and all that. So that was really the big deal. And then when that took a couple of weeks to get that all, then they got a call from the tailor, went down there, and the tailor had kind of a hookup with the guy that was a photographer. So that's how Daddy got his picture up on the wall. That's when he took that picture. So we had just been we'd just gotten our uniforms, and we'd already gone. We're getting ready now to have our ceremony. And the ceremony, graduation at Pensacola, it's very hard to describe. It was just so awesome and so very touching and so awe-inspiring, and just had goosebumps all over, because it was a beautiful day, and they had the Navy band out there and the Marine Corps band out there, and we all went up. And let's see, what was it? The Navy guys were in. Let's see, what were we in? Yeah, let's see. Yeah, we were in our marine greens, and they were in their blues. That was what we were in, and so then our names were called out after we'd had this big, inspiring speech by an admiral and also a general down from Quantico from the Marine Corps. And so then we all went up on the stand, and so then we got our wings flipped on us. And I got to tell you, that was each pilot would go up. Of course, the rest of it would all clap. And we'd gotten so close to each other, going through all the stuff we have and helping this guy out. Like one of Doty's gunnery runs, he couldn't make it, so I took his name tag, and he took mine. I flew his flight for him. It was the funniest thing, because I was walking out the airplane with my goggles down so the instructor wouldn't recognize me, and all those things that you did, for your buddies, and the buddies did for you. And so as each officer name was called out, and we'd all clap, and he'd go up, and then the admiral with the Navy or the general with the Marine Corps would pin the wings on us, and that had to be a day, because so then we had our second lieutenant bars and our wings, so we were about the hottest guys in the world right there, and we were all clapping each other and patting each other in the back, shaking each other's hands, and a lot of the kids had their girlfriends and folks down and for it, and so it was it was a really, really big day. Now, with the Navy custom is that the first person that salutes you, the first enlisted man that salutes you after you're commissioned, gets $1. You give him $1. And that's a tradition that's been going on for a zillion years. So you can see these enlisted men knew damn well what was going on. This was pilot graduation day. All these guys are getting commissioned. So when we would pass out of this area and we would start to walk away, and now we'd received all these little different things. And so as we're walking away, these enlisted men were lined up, and they were each fighting for first place. So this guy was saluting. This was the first time, that somebody has saluted you so that you return the salute. And of course, this happened. Doty and I were walking along, and these two guys come up and they salute us, and we return the salute, and we stop, and they weren't quite sure if they were the first ones or not. So we stopped them and said, "Just a minute," and then we each reached in and gave them each $1. And so now we've just about had it all all done, and it was really great, and then it's about as close to tears as you'll get, because it represented months and months and months and months of intensive, work and washouts, and you had to take check flights, and there wasn't anybody that went through, I don't think, without having a check flight. I had a couple, and that was on navigation, instrument flying, and I had to take 2 check flights on that, and like I say, we all had our ups and we all had our downs, but boy, it was a real tough thing to go through. And it's just too bad that all the young people can't take on something like that and achieve it. It adds so much, and the things I learned there are things that have stayed with me all my life. The way to do things, how to solve the problems. And it was just a great feeling of accomplishment, a tremendous accomplishment, and a great feeling of all the buddy. It's just too bad that everybody, like I say, can't take on a challenge like that, because it helps the individual gain so much confidence in themselves. So it was a tremendous experience, and it was probably the highest part of my life up to that time, and there were very few things that surpassed it. It was just something else, and you felt so good that you've been able to do it and pass with the grades that you did, and so then after we've all been congratulating each other and everything, and then we were assigned back. Then we all went back to the. Of course, all the Marines now. All of us guys went back to our own Marine detachment office, and we wanted to find out, where our duty station was going to be. And they had it posted that we were going to be going down to Opelika, Florida, right outside of Miami. And we were assigned to a master airport, and that we were making right-hand turns. It's a smaller airport than the very large Navy base that was immediately next to us, and they were making left-hand turns. And that got to be kind of dicey later on, because in night flying, when you're coming in, you're making your right-hand turns, and they're making their left-hand turns. You had a chance of getting very close to each other there accidentally. But it was a great little place, and the minute when we reported aboard, of course, everything is Marines. Marines at the gate, and Marine cooks, Marines all over, and there's no Navy personnel whatsoever. So we got our assignment that we were going to be going into dive bombers, going into SPDs, and that we would be first, before we would start checking out in the SPDs, that we were to go down and draw an issue of this combat camouflaged enlisted men's really uniform, and so we all drew the boots and the canteens and the carbines and everything, and helmets and gun belts, and we flew up to Camp Lejeune and spent 4 weeks up there making 11 different landings. They were showing us exactly what our duty was going to be. So they put us aboard a ship. We went out on the ship out in the off the coast there of Carolina, and learned how to go down through the nets and into the landing boats. These were LCTs, what they call landing craft troop, and it was run by a coxswain in the Navy. And so we boarded these LCTs. We had a platoon in each one, and we had a master sergeant in charge There was a lieutenant overseeing him, but the master sergeant wasn't any kind of a hotshot. He was very serious about this. He wasn't taking advantage of the fact that he had 48 brand new second lieutenants, but he was looking at this thing strictly from a standpoint of what could be done. And he had been over in Guadalcanal, and he could see some of the things that had to be perfected and what the real reason for marine aviation was, and that is to protect and support the people on the deck. The Marine Corps had 6 divisions, and the idea was that you'd have a Marine Air Wing for each division. It didn't work out that way at all during the war, but that's the way the table of organization was set up. Many times we'd support the 1st or the 3rd or the 4th division, whatever was needed. And so we found out real fast coming in on these landings, when they dropped, just about the time they're getting ready to drop that big bow where you go running out, and all of a sudden, wham, all those cortex is going off. They have dynamite and cortex and all those different things to simulate a real landing. And some of those charges that were going off were very, very close to us, so that the water would spray inside the craft and you'd get wet. You know, you'd jump in the water and you'd be up to about your knees, somewhere between your knees and hips, and you'd go wading in and realizing that this was basically what the grunt Marines were going through. And this was exactly the reason why they wanted us to do it, so we could see what these men had to put up with in coming aboard shore, and how aviation would play a part in making it easier. And this was very important. I'm very glad we had this training. We spent, like I say, about a month making different landings and understanding how they move through a jungle, and how to put the markers down, how they call for aviation, what aviation should know, and what the ground Marines have to know to pass on to the pilots in the air. And the Marine Corps was more or less the initiator of close air support, and it had started back in the early 20s down in Panama and Nicaragua and that area. And so it had been perfected over the years, and we had now come to be more or less specialists, and this is the job that we have to do, is to support these people, because their idea on the ground is to take that real estate just as fast as they can, and when they run into any obstruction of enemy fire and they're bogged down, and when they call for aviation, we're both reading off the same type of map, the same grid, we're both talking the same language. And the idea here is that what they call William Peter, when that's a white smoke, and when the Marines get bogged down, they call for air support. We would fly over and notice their white smoke, where they were directing it, and that's where they wanted the bombs dropped. They would also put out orange panels about 3 feet wide and 12 feet long, and they'd put those at about 50-foot intervals to let you know in the air where their front line was. And of course the obvious reason there is you didn't want to drop a bomb or strafe on our own troops. Later on, of course, it got a little complicated, because the Japs were interpreting this whenever they'd see the white smoke come from our mortars, and then they would shoot a white smoke over, but we had learned later that their white smoke had a little tint of yellow to it, so we were able to differentiate the difference. This was a very very interesting 4 weeks we spent there, and then we buttoned up and flew back down to Master Airport at Opelika, and got all squared away and went out to the flight line the next morning, and there were our SPDs, and these were just great airplanes. The SPD was responsible for sinking about 40% of the entire Jap fleet. The airplane was actually designed by Northrop and those Northrop engineers turned it over to Douglas. Douglas perfected it some more. And the airplane was actually flying with the Navy as early as 1936 and 37. So you can see that this airplane was obsolete when the war started. But there wasn't an airplane that could dive at such a sharp angle with the assistance of the air with the dive brakes and do such a pinpoint job of it. Midway, again, was a lesson that we went over and over and over again, picking out the good points and trying to improve on the mistakes and the bad points that came up during the Midway operation. This airplane, the SPD, had twice as much horsepower as our old AT-6, or what we call the SNJ Texan. It was 1,200 horsepower, and of course retractable landing gear, landing flaps, dive brakes, and it was a two-place airplane. I sat in the front, and the gunner sat in the back. He'd be a gunner radio operator, and he had twin 30s back there, and I had twin 50s up in the front. And actually, these twin 50s fired through the prop just like the World War I airplanes. We had a very slow rate of fire, and you actually had to load and lock yourself up there. And if you had a number 1 or 2 or 3 jam, you had to take care of it yourself while you're flying the airplane. But it was just a very, very, very rugged airplane, a very sturdy airplane. So we were checked out on the ground and took our cockpit checkout. And I should have mentioned earlier that in the cockpit checkout, you're given a sheet of paper that shows the exact location and description of each instrument in the cockpit. And you have to memorize that. Of course, in the primary trainers and our little N2S bi-wing planes, there was only a few instruments. And then we had more when we got to the multi-vibrator, and then, of course, more when we got into the SNJ, and a heck of a lot more when we got into the SPD. So the requirement there first was that we would memorize all the instruments and gauges and levers and switches, everything in the cockpit. We would have to memorize that and memorize it. And I think there was something like 65 or 70 some odd basic ones that we had to learn. And then they would blindfold you, and they would give you a test on 30 or 40 of them. They would move right along with it, too. There was no wasting any time. While we were getting this indoctrination, we had our instructors were dive bomber pilots, and they had been already in action and were sent back as instructors. And so it was very, very helpful to get to be instructed by a pro. And the way they would do this, after we completed our cockpit checkouts and could do them perfectly, we would sit in the airplane and become very familiar with it. We would taxi it around, and the instructor would be in his SPD and asking questions and making any corrections of things we were doing wrong. So we would taxi up and down about 5 or 6 times, getting the feel of it, getting the sound of the engine, becoming part of that airplane. And then it was a couple days later that we actually started to fly them. And there was a whale of difference. When you'd start this engine, there wasn't like, any of the training planes. This thing had a real bark to it. I noticed on my first takeoff that, holy cow, this thing has really got power. And so you're down the runway in just no time at all, and you're looking down, and my God, you're up to 80 or 90 knots. And so you lift it off and pull up your wheels and close your hood and get your prop into a higher pitch. Lean back on your mixture and ease back on your throttle. Close your cowl flaps and and get your coffee grinder onto the right station.
On the right frequency.
So what we started to do was, with an instructor, we had 5 planes, instructor making 6. So we had 2 Vs of 3, and we would go out over the ocean and spend a lot of time becoming familiar with the airplane itself and what it can do. And the instructor gradually worked us into more maneuvers. We